crossroads of sea and land routes arose a city that would soon become a legend. Its towers and gates held the breath of future heroes and the secret signs of gods, and the wind wandering through its streets seemed a herald of the coming war. Troy, or Ilion according to legend, was founded in the distant depths of antiquity, when the world was still filled with heroes and gods. The legends say that the city was built by Tros, from whom it took its name. He was descended from a divine line. His forefathers were said to be the sons of Dionysus and other heroes. And in some tales, Zeus himself watched over the city's creation. The city arose on a strategic site, upon a hill rising over the plain, not far from the sea. This height allowed its people to see enemies approaching from afar, while the nearby river and coastline sustained life and trade. The first Trojans were skilled builders. They raised walls, constructed homes of stone and wood, worked metals, cultivated the earth, and exchanged goods with their neighbours. From an archaeological standpoint, several cities have stood here one after another since the 3rd millennium BCE, and long before the legendary Troy, people already lived on this hill, built fortifications, and traded across the lands. It all began with the House of Atreus, a family whose glory and curse were woven into an impossible tapestry. Its roots were not in gold or honour, but in sin and bloodshed. Brother killed brother, treachery bred vengeance, and vengeance birthed new crimes. It was a lineage where family duty and the call of honour often turned into an axe. Under the law of blood feud, sons could be called to judge their fathers, and justice was harsh and merciless. The names Tantalus and Pelops echoed through legend with a heavy taste of guilt, deceit, murder, broken oaths, and sacred vows betrayed. And in this chain of crimes, it was easy to foresee the shadow of future ruin, for those raised on vengeance and ambition rarely spare the blood of others. From this house came 2 brothers, whose fates would ignite the greatest of conflicts, Agamemnon and Menelaus. Agamemnon became the ruler of a mighty kingdom, uniting armies under his banners. Menelaus, younger and less powerful, ruled Sparta, where shone one of the most mysterious stars of the ancient world, Helen. Her beauty, they said, was not made by man, but by a god. From her birth she carried within her a rare and dangerous power, the power to stir men's hearts and, with a single misstep, to topple entire kingdoms. Helen was born in the house of Leda and Tyndareus, under divine protection. Her father was proud of her. Her mother sighed at her beauty. Guests came, stopped at the doorway to gaze upon her, and fell silent. When tales of her reached other lands, the greatest men of Hellas came to ask for her hand. But fate wove otherwise. Among her suitors was one who concealed his nature behind clever words. Odysseus, the cunning statesman, wise in counsel. In the end, Helen became the wife of Menelaus. It was a political marriage, binding noble houses and kingdoms. For a time, it seemed a rare union where beauty met reason. But mortals seldom understand the limits of desire and hope until the gods enter the game. On the far shore, in the land of Ilios, later called Troy, another child was born, Paris. Legend tells that at his birth, a prophecy was spoken. The boy would bring ruin upon his city. His father Priam, frightened by fate, renounced the infant and ordered him left on the mountain. Neighbours whispered, and shepherds found the child, raising him without knowing or wishing to know his royal blood. So are tragic figures often born, torn from the laws of blood and power, growing up with borrowed hopes and secret sorrow. The gods, those silent and thunderous witnesses of human deeds, were not indifferent either. One day, at a feast upon Mount Ida, A quarrel arose among three goddesses, a quarrel destined to awaken disaster. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each embodying wisdom, honor, and love, disputed who among them was the fairest. This vanity among immortals soon drew humanity back into its whirlpool. Zeus, unwilling to judge between them, placed the decision in mortal hands. In the hands of Paris, a youth who could not yet know that his choice would become his doom. Paris, seated beneath the branches of an oak, knowing neither honor nor crown, began to weigh the gifts of the goddesses. Each offered him a bribe. Hera promised wisdom and mastery in rule. Athena, glory and triumph in war. And Aphrodite, smiling her dark, knowing smile, promised love, the kind that makes the world move under new laws. And so, scarcely thinking of the price of divine words, Paris chose Aphrodite. She, as it is told, granted him the most perilous reward of all, the heart of a woman from another land. That reward had a name, Helen, wife of Menelaus. A world ruled by treaties and diplomacy was, for a fleeting moment, surrendered to passion. Aphrodite did not compel Helen to flee. She merely sowed in their souls a seed of longing, granting one man the courage of desire and robbing others of foresight to see its cost. When Paris arrived in Sparta, he was a guest, a young man seeking refuge and fame. He met Helen, and between them, it seems, a bond flared that neither words nor duty could explain. Historians and poets would later argue about cunning and love, about force and choice, but that night decisions were made not by reason, but by flesh and the voice of the heart. How Helen's departure occurred, that remains the subject of countless versions and whispers. In one, she left of her own will, driven by passion and Aphrodite's promise. In another, she was taken, by deception or force, turning love into a crime against the sacred law of hospitality. Whatever the truth, the fact remained. Helen and Paris left Sparta and sailed for Ilios. For Menelaus, her loss was more than personal. It was humiliation, an open wound to his honor, a blow to the sacred bond of hospitality that bound men together. When a man leaves another's home with another's wife, no court can restore what was broken. Such crimes demand the judgment of greater hands, and justice is sought in blood. Agamemnon, elder brother to Menelaus, summoned the kings and warriors of Greece. It was a call not merely for vengeance, but for the restoration of order. If such an insult went unpunished, the world itself would descend into chaos. Old alliances awakened. Heroes gathered at their ships, fastening their armor like men who did not expect an easy victory, but who knew the price of duty. Thus, from a personal scandal, from a brother's insult, was born the cause of a war that through years of blood and fire would become legend. Yet even at its beginning, when the ships still stood upon the shore, and the salt wind had not yet carried the scent of blood, a shadow already loomed, the shadow of a house long cursed, and of gods who never lose their games. What began as a quarrel over beauty, a private passion, a rivalry among sisters divine, would grow into a story that would overturn generations. Men went to war with their pride and their sins, and in that mixture of greatness and weakness was born the tragedy that would forever change the face of the ancient world. After Helen left with Paris and the sea swallowed their ship, silence fell over Sparta, a silence heavy with rising fury. Menelaus, humiliated and mocked, swore to reclaim his wife and punish the one who had dared touch his honor. He went to his brother, King Agamemnon of Mycenae, a harsh and power-hungry ruler. Agamemnon needed no persuasion. War promised glory, and with it, dominion over all of Greece. At his command, heralds traveled across the land, reminding every warrior of the oath once sworn at Helen's feet, to defend her honor, no matter who became her husband. Thus rose the kings and heroes of Greece. Achilles arrived, Young as a sunbeam, terrible in anger, with his loyal companion Patroclus, came Odysseus, clever and unwilling, yet bound by fate. Diomedes, brave and straightforward as a blade, and Ajax, tall as a tower, strong as a bull. Each brought his ships, his swords, his men. Along the shores of Aulis, a sea of masts grew, and the wind filled sails ready to bear them toward Troy. But before they could set sail, the wrath of the gods stilled the air. No wind blew. The ships stood motionless, chained to the earth. Then the seer Calchas spoke. Artemis demanded a sacrifice, a human one. The victim must be Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon himself. The king wrestled with his soul, but pride and power won over a father's love. The girl was brought to the camp under the pretense of marrying Achilles. When she learned the truth, she did not weep. She simply lifted her eyes to the heavens and said, "Let my blood open the way." And when her life faded, the wind stirred and the sails began to move. So began a campaign the world had never seen. The ships stretched to the horizon, the sea alive with bronze and shouts of oarsmen. As they reached the shores of Troy, the sun rose behind the walls once built by Poseidon himself, and the city shone as if crafted by gods, not men. From its gates came the Trojans, Paris, Aeneas and Hector, Priam's son, Andromache's husband, and the city's defender. Before the battle, it raised his hands to the sky and said, "Let this land decide who is worthy to live under the sun." And the earth answered, with the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel. The first battles were fierce but fruitless. A war begun for a woman soon turned into a war for glory. The Greeks built their camp by the sea, and Troy closed its gates. Years passed, springs into winters, yet neither side could overcome the other. Achilles fought like a god of war. Wherever he appeared, men fell in heaps, but in him burned pride fiercer than fear. When Agamemnon insulted him by taking Briseis, his captive, Achilles swore never to fight again. Without him, the Greeks began to lose. The plain before Troy became a field of despair. Every day brought new deaths. Even death itself seemed weary of blood. All the while the gods watched. Athena, cold and wise, aided the Greeks. Apollo, radiant and vengeful, stood with the Trojans. Aphrodite shielded her son Paris, while Poseidon raised and calmed the seas for his amusement. And Zeus, from his throne, ensured no side gained the final upper hand, for without balance there can be no drama. When the Greeks fell under Hector's assault, their cries reached Achilles, yet pride bound his tongue. Then Patroclus, who loved him more than life, donned Achilles' armor and led the men to battle. The Trojans, seeing the gleam of that divine armor, believed Achilles had returned and faltered. But Hector, driven by fate, struck him down and stripped his armor. When the body of his friend was brought back to camp, Achilles wept for the first time in years. His cry was louder than storms, and even the gods turned away. He knew he would soon die, but not before vengeance. He stepped onto the field, and the earth trembled. None could stand before him. He sought Hector and found him. Their fight was short and terrible. Hector begged that his body be returned to his father, but Achilles, blinded by grief, drove his spear through him and tied the corpse to his chariot, dragging it through the dust. That day, honor died alongside heroism. But that night, when silence returned, old Priam came to Achilles' tent, a king wrapped in sorrow, not in pride. He fell at the feet of his son's killer and whispered, "I kiss the hands that killed my child. Give me his body." And Achilles, seeing not an enemy but a father, wept again. He ordered Hector's body to be washed, and for a moment peace descended, brief as the breath before a storm. That night was the last moment of human greatness before madness returned. Achilles knew his death was near. Priam knew his city was doomed. Yet both were silent. Somewhere above, the gods quarreled over destinies, while on earth men, drained by years of war, no longer knew where glory ended and the curse began. Troy still stood, but doom was already upon it, slow, inevitable, like the tide creeping toward the shore. And in that moment, history held its breath before plunging into the abyss. For beyond the final sunset, there awaited a night in which an entire city would burn. After long years beneath the walls of Troy, it seemed that even the earth had grown weary of blood. Dust and cries had become the familiar sounds of mourning, and by evening, smoke rose over the plain, mingled with prayers and lamentations. Men no longer believed the war would ever end. The Trojans still stood proudly behind their walls, and the Greeks, though wounded and exhausted, could not retreat. Yet neither side remembered why the war had begun. Helen's name sounded like a forgotten song, and only the habit of battle kept men gripping their swords. Meanwhile, death was slowly erasing the names of heroes. Hector, the defender of Troy, fell before its walls, and the whole land wept over his body. His death brought no victory, only a silence heavy with dread. Then came the day when Achilles himself, the one thought invincible, met his fate. Paris's arrow, guided by Apollo's hand, found his single vulnerable spot, and with a cry filled more with pain than rage, the greatest of the Greeks fell. When his body was carried to the pyre, the sea roared as if mourning him. With his death, the war lost its light. From that moment, all that followed was the slow fading of a glorious age. The Trojans rejoiced at every brief lull, but their joy was short-lived. The Greeks were weakened, yet among them remained one man whose strength lay not in the spear, but in the mind. Odysseus, the one who understood best that fortresses are not always taken by force, and where the sword fails, cunning prevails. He had waited patiently, watching gods and men exhaust their last hopes, and then he proposed what none would have dared even to imagine: to build a giant wooden horse, a supposed gift to Athena, goddess of war and wisdom. And so, on the shore where swords had once clashed, something strange arose. The colossal body of a beast, hewn from planks, adorned with bronze, bearing a pious inscription upon its flank. The Greeks appeared to burn their tents, board their ships, and sail away, leaving only the horse behind. Only one warrior remained, Sinon, claiming to have been abandoned as a sacrifice to the gods. When the Trojans found him, he told them a tale. The horse was a sacred offering to Athena, and if brought into the city, it would bring Troy her favor and protection. The weary people wanted to believe, but not all did. The old priest Laocoon came forward and cried, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts!" He hurled his spear into the horse's side, and the wood gave a deep hollow groan, as if alive. For a moment fear chilled the Trojans' hearts, but fate had already prepared a sign to silence their doubt. From the sea emerged two enormous serpents, sent by the gods, writhing and hissing as they struck down Laocoon and his sons. The crowd screamed in terror, believing the gods punished him for defying their divine gift. When it was over, the bodies of the priest and his children lay by the altar, and the waves washed away their blood. After that, no one questioned further. The gates of Troy were opened, and the horse was dragged inside with songs and torches. Night fell. The first peaceful night in 10 years. People sang, lit fires, and offered sacrifices to the gods. King Priam sat in his palace, surrounded by sons and grandchildren, gazing at the stars and saying that the gods had finally shown mercy. Women stepped into the streets, Children laughed. Life seemed to return where death had reigned so long. But above the city hung a shadow. In hearts filled with joy, there was still a trace of unease, and only Cassandra, the prophetess, wandered through the streets with hollow eyes, whispering, "It is full of soldiers, full of death." Her words drowned in laughter, in music, in the flicker of torches. No one listened. When the night grew deep, movement stirred inside the horse. Through the planks, smelling of pitch and sweat, men began to descend, silent as shadows. Odysseus was the first, his eyes glinting like those of a beast in darkness. Then came Menelaus, Diomedes, and Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. They opened the gates, and from beyond the promontory sailed the ships that had been waiting for the signal. As the first torch flared above Troy, the sea already carried thousands of warriors toward its doomed walls. The waking citizens saw the light and thought it was dawn. When they understood, it was too late. The Greeks poured through the streets, and every house, every square filled with screams. The air blazed with fire. Bronze clanged like bells. Old Priam fell at Zeus's altar, slain by Achilles' son, a youth who had inherited only his father's cruelty. Andromache, Hector's widow, stood clutching her child. They demanded the boy, and she begged for mercy. But the men, fearing vengeance even in infancy, hurled him from the wall. Cassandra was found praying at the temple. Agamemnon took her as a captive, not knowing she would bring his own doom. Helen stood in the palace, motionless as marble. When Menelaus saw her, he raised his sword, but his hand refused to strike. He only said, "So many died because of you, and still I cannot kill you." Thus the love that began the war became its final breath. The city burned for 3 days and nights. The wind carried ashes to the sea, and from the walls once built by gods, only heaps of stone remained. Those who survived that night said the earth beneath Troy was forever soaked with weeping, and that even its grass would never grow as green. The Greeks departed, laden with gold and captives, yet each bore within him a stain no river could wash away. They had won, but they were not free. For Troy's fall ended not only a war, but an entire age of heroes. And through the dawn smoke, a man walked slowly away, his face grey with ash. On his shoulders, he carried his aged father, and by hand he led a child. It was Aeneas, the Trojan whom the gods had spared, so that from his blood one day would rise another city, another empire, another humanity. He did not look back. Behind him, the towers crumbled into dust. Before him stretched the sea, cold and silent as eternity. Thus fell Troy, a city built by the hands of gods and destroyed by the hands of men. It was not walls or weapons that doomed it, but pride, jealousy, and passion, the forces that dwell in every human heart. And for that reason, the memory of Troy has never died. When the last torch faded over Troy's ashes, night fell upon the sea, and only the wind knew who was still alive. The city built by divine hands had turned to dust. Its smoke rose toward the heavens like a final prayer. The Greeks, drunk on victory, gathered their spoils and prepared to sail home. But the gods had already turned away. The triumph won through blood and deceit became the beginning of their curse. Agamemnon, Lord of Kings, sailed back to Mycenae with gold and with Cassandra. The captive prophetess, no one believed. In her eyes lived the knowledge from which there was no escape. When the ships reached home, the palace did not greet its king with joy, but with a shadow. His wife, Clytemnestra, still haunted by the sacrifice of their daughter, awaited him with a smile. When Agamemnon entered the house, she cast a net over him and struck with the sword. Blood poured onto the marble, and Cassandra, laughing and weeping at once, whispered, "I saw this in a dream." Thus ended the king who began a war for glory. Achilles did not live to see Troy's fall. His soul wandered the dim meadows of Hades. Yet even in death, his name found no peace. His son, Neoptolemus, who inherited only his father's cruelty, took Andromache, Hector's widow, as his slave, and with her, the child of his slain enemy. Thus blood mingled with blood, and the curse became a lineage. Odysseus, cunning and steadfast, too set out for home. But the will of the gods did not release him so easily. The seas became his trial. Every island hid a trap, every dawn a new temptation. He met the sirens whose songs promised death, lost his men to the jaws of Polyphemus, spent years on the island of Circe and in Calypso's embrace, forgetting time itself. Yet all of it was only the road toward home, where Penelope waited, weaving and unweaving her shroud to deceive her suitors. And when at last he returned, grey-haired, broken, but alive, no one knew him but his dog, old as memory itself. And in that moment, Odysseus understood. The home he sought had already become legend. But some did not seek to return. Among the ruins of Troy remained a few, and among them Aeneas. On that burning night, he lifted his father Anchises upon his shoulders and led his son Ascanius through the flames. The gods willed that the blood of Troy should not vanish. Aeneas was destined to wander, not for vengeance, but for the future. For years he drifted across the seas like a leaf in the storm. He came to Carthage, where Queen Dido loved him and died of that love, cursing all Greeks. That curse would echo through centuries when Rome and Carthage met again as enemies. Long he travelled, until at last he stepped upon the shores of Italy. There, among wild tribes and ancient oaks, he founded a city, from which one day would rise Rome, the new empire, where the descendants of the Trojans would rule the world. And when he died, his name became not a symbol of destruction, but of continuation. Troy had fallen, but its spirit endured, merely changed its form. And the gods, they too had changed. Zeus, weary of mortal passions, no longer meddled in their fates. Athena withdrew into the silence of temples, worshipped by other peoples. Aphrodite still inspired hearts with love, but now she knew that behind every kiss lay the shadow of war. The world once torn apart by them would never be the same. Thus ended the age of heroes. Humanity, exhausted by blood, began to tell myths, not of battles, but of journeys. And Troy, burned and forgotten, became a mirror in which mankind saw both its sins and its dreams. For every time a new empire is born, somewhere in its foundation lies the ashes of old Troy. And if at night the wind whispers above the sea, you might still hear a faint call, not a cry nor a song, but remembrance. The sea remembers the ships that sailed toward the city where love became war, and war, the beginning of a world. Centuries passed after Aeneas set foot upon the shores of Italy. Time washed the blood from the stones, but not from memory. His son Ascanius founded the city of Alba Longa, and from there began the line of Trojan kings whose destiny was to restore the greatness of the fallen city on a new land. Yet fate, like the sea, never rests. Every greatness demands its own tragedy. The grandsons and great-grandsons of Aeneas lived under a prophecy that one day the descendants of Troy would become rulers of the world. Both gods and men knew this. But when twins were born in Alba Longa, Romulus and Remus, no one yet understood that through them the prophecy would be fulfilled. Their mother, Rhea Silvia, was a king's daughter, forced to become a priestess of Vesta, sworn to remain childless. Yet the god Mars desired her, and from their union came 2 boys, those whom destiny had chosen for greatness. King Amulius, fearing the prophecy, ordered the infants to be drowned in the river. But the river refused them. The waves carried the basket to shore, where a she-wolf stood. She approached, sniffed the children, and like a mother, gave them milk. Thus Romulus and Remus grew, not in a palace, but among beasts and forests, beneath a sky that knew no laws. When they became men, the truth was revealed to them, who they were and where they came from. They killed Amulius and restored the throne to their family, yet they would not stay. They were drawn to the river where their lives began. There, fate waited for its hour. They decided to build a new city, upon 7 hills by the water. But even brothers cannot share power without blood. A quarrel arose. Who would rule? Who would give the city his name? When the conflict became unbearable, Romulus raised his sword and killed Remus. They say the earth trembled in that moment, and even the she-wolf who had nursed them howled in grief. But Romulus did not stop. He built walls, raised banners, and named the city after himself, Rome. Thus, from blood was born a new empire, from guilt, strength, from loneliness, a people. Romulus gathered around him outcasts, robbers and runaway slaves, all who had no home. From chaos, he made order, from the nameless, citizens. And when he died, they say a storm lifted him into the heavens, where he became the god Quirinus, protector of Rome. Centuries passed. The descendants of Romulus expanded their borders, subdued their neighbors, built roads, temples and laws. With every conquered nation their glory grew, and no one remembered that Trojan blood still flowed in their veins. But the gods remembered, and sometimes, when Rome raised its sword against the world, somewhere in the west, the wind would carry a whisper, a reminder of a burning city, a wooden horse, and Helen's tears. The empire grew like an oak whose roots reached into ancient myth. It conquered the earth, the sea, even time itself. Yet in its heart lived a shadow, the memory that all greatness stands upon ruins. Aeneas, the man who saved not a kingdom but meaning itself, became a symbol not of war but of the journey. And when Romans spoke of destiny, they used the word their ancestors had known, fatum, that which leads without asking. Then came new ages. Heroes became consuls, gods turned to statues, and myths became books. Yet in every generation, Rome still saw itself as Troy's heir. Even when the city fell to the barbarians and its marble turned to dust, the legend did not die. For it is not walls that create a civilization. It is the stories people tell, so they will not forget who they once were. And somewhere, deep within time, a quiet flame still burns. It is not the torch of war, nor the pyre of destruction. It is the memory of those who fled the burning city, carrying the old upon their shoulders and the young in their arms, so that one day, centuries later, they might build an eternal city. Troy died so that Rome could be born, and perhaps one day Rome too will fall, to make way for a new world, where once again the ancient question will echo, what is stronger, fate or man? Millennia have passed. The ashes of ancient cities have long become the soil from which new ones grow, and yet the name Troy has never vanished. It crossed the centuries, as if time itself had guarded it in memory. People built kingdoms, toppled empires, changed languages, but the word Troy remained, like a secret note resonating through the ages, because it is not merely a city, it is a mirror of the human soul. The Greeks saw in Troy a lesson in pride, that invisible boundary which even a hero must not cross. The Romans saw in it the symbol of their origin, the justification of their power, a sacred chain linking them to the gods. And poets, painters, and philosophers, centuries later, found in Troy not antiquity, but eternity. For Homer, it became a song. For Virgil, a prophecy. For Dante, a memory of loss. And for Shakespeare, a reflection of human folly. But if one looks deeper, Troy is not about war. It is about choice, about how the passion of a single man can ignite a fire capable of consuming the world, about how heroes, convinced of their righteousness, destroy what they love most, about how the gods, symbols of our fate and our weakness, watch us as if we were pieces in a game where the stakes are always too high. Every age seeks its own Troy. Sometimes it is a city, sometimes an idea, sometimes a person, and every time the pattern repeats. Blinded love, pride, sacrifice, destruction. Yet behind this endless cycle lies not madness, but the search for meaning. Humanity cannot forget Troy because within it lies the essence of what it means to be human, the desire to possess and the fear of loss, the longing for eternity and the certainty of destruction. They say that beneath the hills of Asia Minor, the ruins of the real Troy still sleep. Archaeologists uncover fragments of walls, bones and clay vessels, traces of that distant age. But the true Troy no longer lives on the earth. It lives in the mind. It exists in every heart that has known love, betrayal, war, and forgiveness. Every person who has lost something they thought eternal has already been a citizen of Troy. When Homer composed his song, he was not merely recounting the past. He was crafting a mirror into which humanity would gaze again and again, and each time see itself there, with sword, with torch, with hope, because the story of Troy is neither an ending nor a beginning. It is the breath of life, its pain and its power. And if at night, when the world grows silent, you walk to the sea and listen to the wind, you may hear something ancient, the whisper of fire, the distant thunder of hooves, the cry of a woman whose name doomed kingdoms to fall. These are not the sounds of war. They are the echoes of memory, reminding us that all things pass except the human heart, which still seeks, as it always has, meaning in love and redemption. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If you enjoyed it, please support the channel. Give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss new videos.